Hey, today is a big day. I'm going to be defining integration, which is the definition of health in this whole blog that I'm talking about. And so I've done two videos leading up to this because I wanted people to understand what your window of tolerance is and how an emotion relates to a person either staying in their window of tolerance and increasing their level of integration, or how like a more negative emotion relates to going down in integration and leaving their window of tolerance and going into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So that's from the last two videos. If you can look at those two things, it's really interesting how emotions originate from sensations in the body. It's called interoception. And it's quite profound if you understand at the core, when we're born, there are some fundamental aspects of consciousness, which is brightness, where wavelengths come off of objects into our eyes. We have brightness, we have loudness, where air pressure comes into our ears, and then we have affect. Those are three core features of consciousness that we get when we're born. And the affect piece is what I'm talking about today. This is a little bit of a side tangent, but it's amazing because when we look at affect, basically what it is it's a range, it's called valence, from pleasant to unpleasant. And then you have calm, it's called arousal, all the way high to like high arousal. Sometimes I call that agitation or just high arousal. So when you're born, you don't have like happiness when you get a warning instead of a speeding ticket, and happiness when you graduate high school. You have like 100 different definitions of happiness, and shame and disgust and betrayal, and you have thousands and thousands of emotion words. That this template that you're born with of affect relates to what's going on with interoception, with your inner body. She calls it, Lisa Barrett calls it your body budgeting. It has to do with the way your body is just kind of managing like your temperature and your heart rate. So I talked about that in the definition of emotion, but the reason why it's important today is when we get to higher states of integration, what happens is we have higher emotional granularity. We have more vocabulary words, so we can differentiate between different terms, and we can have more flexibility. Like if we only have, let's say, 5 emotion words, and whatever happens to us, we have that thing happen to us. We have these feelings in our body, and then I call it the superhighway. We just have 5 words that we use to describe everything that's happening to us. It's real limited. I would say our window of tolerance is quite limited. Whereas if we have 1,000 terms for whatever it is that's happening to us, it allows us to have more flexibility, more curiosity about what's going on. And I like to think of it as like a sea of sensations. We're constantly having sensations come in, that brightness, that loudness, and that affect, which are core features of our consciousness. And so integration today being the definition of health, what we want to think of in this model is it's high differentiation, high linkage. High differentiation, high linkage. So when we think of that in terms of a physical example, we would think of bilateral hemispheric integration, which is the left and the right hemispheres working optimally. So the differentiation is when you have something happen to you, ideally it comes in. Let's say I'm looking out a window right now and someone threw something and the glass broke. I'd be like, oh my gosh. So there would be a body sensation of shock. It would go up through into my right hemisphere, and then ideally, then it would go through the corpus callosum into my left hemisphere, and I would have language for it. And so the differentiation would be, I kind of have that sort of body sense of it first in my right hemisphere, and then it would come out and I would have words for it with time in my left hemisphere. And that would be optimal bilateral hemispheric integration, where you have the differentiation, which is the different hemispheres working in their optimal order. And then the linkage would be that the corpus callosum is large enough that it's robust and it has a lot of integrative fibers. So that's the differentiation and the linkage from like a physical standpoint. Differentiation and linkage is a little more complicated when we're talking about it with relationships. So with relationships, what it is the differentiation is honoring differences, and the linkage is caring connections. So, and I have an example like of a teenager is breaking down. If you have too much, and you're the parent, if you have too much differentiation, you're like, grow up, you're 15 now, and you're just too differentiated. You're not giving that person enough sense of connection and care, that they're allowed to have their emotion, but they also can stay connected to you. So that's too much differentiation. And if you have too much linkage, when the teenager starts having a crying, let's say, you start crying too. And you don't allow enough there's too much linkage. You don't allow enough differentiation for that teenager to just have their experience. So it's called the sweet spot, where you have just the right amount of differentiation and linkage in relationships. And what's happening is you're having a wide window of tolerance. And when someone has a wide window of tolerance in relationships, when they have high integration, what happens is they're able to honor and tolerate differences more. They're able to see, even though that person is very different than me, there are a lot of ways that we're caringly connected. We both have a beating heart. We both have a brain. When we were born, we shared the fundamental aspects of consciousness, of brightness, loudness, and affect. And the way our brain works is, unless we train it differently, if we see someone like of a different culture than us, we're going to use our elephant and we're going to sense danger, and we're going to judge that person as something very scary. But if we train ourselves, when we see someone different than us, to think of what it is that we share in common, that calms down the stress response and allows us to link up what our natural response is to excessively differentiate. So with this differentiation and linkage, once we understand this model, and I'll explain it more with time, we can more intelligently link with people, we can have higher states of integration, and we can be with differences and caringly connect with more people, which is the intention of this blog. This blog is that I was hoping that I could have different people who are interested in how can we achieve higher states of consciousness, and including those other states, relationship with God, because if we have people coming from different religions, from different spiritualities, if we can honor our differences and caringly connect, then we can all actually have a conversation about these things without making other people right or us right or wrong. Is that we just honor differences and we continue to connect, and we think, what are the things that we share in common? What are the things that are different? And we stay in friendly curiosity. So I think that was enough on integration today. I'll do a PowerPoint next week, just defining this more, but just that differentiation and linkage and getting used to those terms and seeing me talk about it more, you'll begin to learn more about it.